Hi, it's Craig and Richard here for our week 3 feedback video. Good to be with you all again.
Yep.
And it's been another interesting week, and a lot of learners really connecting with the what's called we call the big 4 cognitive aspects of mindfulness.
Like keys to open the locks that trap the mind, said one of our learners, which I think is a very apt description of the big 4.
Sounds like it's straight out of the Matrix, which is a good metaphor for mindfulness, I think. And a number of the learners noticing that things like acceptance and exploring that, and questions arising. What's the difference between, say, acceptance and giving up, or
apathy, resignation?
Yeah. But it's not actually about turning away from a situation, but an accepting attitude, even if a difficult situation that we need to step into and respond to, but accepting that it is the way it is.
It's actually a turning towards, isn't it? Acceptance, genuine acceptance.
It's often a very empowering thing when we're in a situation of not accepting something we don't like. Acceptance isn't, oh, well, who cares? Because often what happens when we walk away from that situation with that kind of pretend acceptance is we haven't really internally accepted. We're just kind of grumbling and internally ruminating about it, as opposed to when there's real acceptance, there's a kind of a clarity. The mind stops perseverating and just engages with the situation, or we do actually keep our peace. And it's not like an external peace, but internal conflict. It's kind of like an internal sense of peace. We're okay with it being what it is.
Yeah, and for some it's an ongoing practice as well of accepting and then getting caught in the resistance again and then just stepping back into that space of accepting.
Yeah.
Particularly things like what's happening right now with COVID. It's very hard to accept, and we've got new lockdowns happening in Melbourne here. And for those people affected, it's very hard just to accept that. So it's an ongoing practice, moment by moment, of just stepping out of that resistance.
That's
that
right.
Tug of war with life that we get caught in.
And in a sense, it's not like, oh, we have to accept. It's like, well, we can bring awareness to the effect of acceptance and awareness to the effect of non-acceptance, and perhaps the futility of railing against the fact that it's raining when we want it to be dry, or railing against something else, but it is what it is.
And that's what the big 4 do really well. They help us to start noticing these things and to explore the effect of accepting, as you said, versus non-accepting.
Interesting stuff about, say, attachment, and it's easy to get attached to the good stuff, the stuff we find pleasant.
Of course.
And non-attachment is non-attachment.
Well, that's the other side of the coin, isn't it? I don't want the bad stuff, but I want the good stuff. And that's actually the same glue binding us to our experience in the same way.
That's right. And when the good stuff passes and we're attached to it, then we have this sense of lack and so on, rather than just being able to enjoy it when it's there and then put it down when it's time to put it down.
That's right. Yeah.
And also just noting about, well, what about being present? Doing chores and the things that we don't like to, it's like, why do I want to be present to that? Well, we can get mental rest in even simple mundane activities. But often when we're doing things that we don't like, there's the physical activity, but there's the internal dialogue about how much I hate doing
this. When's it going to be over? Why do I have to do this? And that's what's creating the suffering and the stress.
I mean, imagine a child, playing, tea parties or something. Oh, I've got to make another pot of tea. I've got to serve some tea. It's like, a child doesn't do that. Child's just sort of engaging in the activity without all the extra attitude that we as an adult often bring to things. And in a way, it's a little bit like being like a child, just coming to the activity without all the attitude.
Yeah. Now, there's a comment as well about staying present and applying these things in the heat of the moment. I mean, it's like anything. We want to start small, don't we, with mindfulness practice? I mean, I think of perhaps a tennis player having to change the grip on the racket, or a musician having to change the way they're holding the instrument. They practice that, and of course, when they're in the heat of it and playing and on centre court, they're going to change back. But it's the moment they realise, oh, holding that the wrong way again, let's put my thumb there, and then you get lost back in that, and it's just this constant stepping out of these habits. And I think with practice, that's really what we want to do. We just want to learn to notice when we're perhaps caught up in those habits, and particularly in extreme situations, so that we can come back to presence, come back to being kind with ourselves, or whatever it is that we're practicing there.
Yeah, and many people learning mindfulness want to bring it to some big life challenge, difficult situation, and find it hard to do that without sort of saying, well, what about bringing mindfulness to the little things, the little letting go, the little moments of being present. And if we build up with the little things, then we may find that we've got the wherewithal to actually bring it to some challenging thing. it's a little bit like taking on an easier activity and building up and increasing the complexity of something. So we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves if we find it hard to be mindful in some really challenging moment. We should just be thankful, even if we have a moment of awareness and realize that we're not being mindful in a challenging moment. That's actually really quite a moment of insight in itself. But it's starting with the easy stuff. It's like learning, diving. They talk about the degree of complexity of a dive. And so build up from the simpler stuff. And,
I'm at the point of going head first into the pool. That's where I'm at. So I'm pretty happy being there. And of course, it's about building it up slowly, and it's about doing the meditation that supports this. Because when we do that daily practice of meditation, we are just practicing those, I guess, meta skills that then allow us to be more mindful in everyday life.
Yeah, that little moment of stillness, that little moment of awareness, and some interesting observations about the awareness coming in, but not the acceptance first.
Well, it's interesting because often the awareness of things, we start to notice what's happening, and the acceptance part, which is the other sort of side of mindfulness, that tends to lag a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's very common, and we're reading that a lot in this week's comments, that people are noticing that they're caught in all kinds of stuff. There are unpleasant feelings. They're sort of judging themselves for procrastinating, multitasking, or catastrophizing. Okay, so the point is to notice that, and of course you're going to judge it. The mind immediately judges everything, but then we want to step out of that and say, what if I just accepted that this is what was happening right now? I'm procrastinating. Great. So you've gone from procrastinating without any awareness to procrastinating with awareness.
And it's entirely appropriate that the awareness comes before change in attitude or change in response. The awareness has to come first, because otherwise it's just low awareness habit ruling our lives. And so the awareness first before we cultivate all the other aspects that we associate with being more mindful.
Yeah. I did want to say something about the meditation exercise this week, because one of our learners, or some of them I think, were asking about, sensations of floating and perhaps imagery, like a sense of kind of an aerial view of what was happening. And I think there could be a few different things happening there. I mean, first of all, sensations will arise when we're meditating, and the whole point's just
the sense of lightness in the body.
Well, yeah, I mean, all sorts of different things, and none of them are particularly important. We just want to notice them and accept them and let them go. Maybe a sense of lightness as we let go of all that default mode activity, and often people do feel a little bit lighter. Some people feel heavier. They focus on the body and they feel more grounded and more here, and they're all just part of the practice. The clinical psychologist in me starts seeing things like, sensations of floating in an aerial view. So I start to think, is that person or are those people who were commenting on it, are they in their body? We want to make sure that we're not detaching or dissociating from the body when we meditate. It's one thing to be light because we've let go of all those worries and concerns. It's another thing to be kind of spacing out. So we want to make sure that we're feeling the body. You want to feel the contact that your body makes with the chair. You want to feel your feet on the ground. And if that's not happening, perhaps open the eyes, go for a little bit of a mindful walk, or do some other practice, because we do want to make sure that we stay in the body.
Sometimes people go into imagery, there's a sense of lightness, and all of a sudden the mind starts to imagine, floating through the air, and all of a sudden that's imagery, but we're out of touch with the present moment.
Because we're lost in, it's actually a thought, isn't it? We're lost in thoughts.
And imagining.
We're imagining meditating, or we're thinking about, this is a great meditation, and we're back into thoughts.
Yeah.
So we come back to the body, back to the senses. Come to your senses.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Just briefly about multitasking, some interesting discoveries and a lot of people noticing can't really pay attention to two complex things at the same time. Question around, say, orchestra and multitasking in the orchestra. And if we could just draw perhaps a distinction. So
multitasking there meaning playing and listening and watching the conductor and reading the music at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. You're in touch with the other musicians around you, looking at the conductor and so on. And that's not really multitasking in the sense that there are multiple parts of one activity playing in an orchestra, which is different to if the musician had War and Peace on their Kindle
and they're trying to spot mum in the audience,
music stand at the same time, and trying to read the music and read War and Peace.
Because then there's two different tasks, aren't there? And we're switching between totally different things,
unrelated tasks, rather than like when you're driving and you're listening to the GPS give you instructions. The listening and the driving are two things, and areas of the brain are swapping information and working as one, which is different when you're asking the brain to do two entirely unrelated
things. To drive
things.
and listen to a podcast. Totally different thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
So And also an interesting comment about, how about, judging, judging, and it's like, or not judging that judging.
Well, that's what I was talking about before. I mean,
Yeah.
first you notice it, and the point is to not judge it.
Yeah, and it's a little bit like, how do you not judge the judging? And it's a little bit like when you go about your day-to-day life and you see somebody being a little bit judgmental, and we observe somebody being judgmental, and I hate it when somebody's judgmental, and it's terrible, and they shouldn't be doing that, and so on, as opposed to just noticing, somebody's being judgmental, and you just, somebody's caught up in something. And there's a kind of observing, but we can bring that same awareness to ourselves. The mind's judging, but there's just a noticing of the judging without adding attitude to it, which is, I hate it when I'm judging, and I shouldn't be doing that, and which is just judging and adding another layer to it. So, but we can, I think, learn to bring that sort of awareness to ourselves.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all we've got time for this week. And next week, mindful of emotions, which is one of the most interesting and challenging areas.
It is
mindful
indeed.
eating, creativity. We've got a longer practice as well, if you'd like to practice for a longer period of time. But keep the comments coming, the reflections and the supportive insights, and also follow Jen and Sherelle.
Yeah, if you just join the course, follow the mentors so you can really stay up to date.
Yeah, we'll look forward to being with you next week.